Hey, Newbie Dan here. I shoot my YouTube videos using a camera like this one, actually using multiple cameras like this one. The problem is that the display doesn't fold out. And since I don't have any helpers while I'm shooting the video, it's a little hard to make sure that I have everything framed correctly. So I came up with a solution that didn't cost me an arm and a leg. A mirror, some wood, some screws and nuts, and now I can see what I'm shooting. Stick around, I'll show you how I made it. This is a disclaimer. We're going to make something that you mount your camera to. That means there's a possibility that your camera might fall off and break. Turns out that can happen regardless of what kind of mount you use. There's always a possibility that your camera could fall down and go boom. This is just a friendly reminder that stuff happens and it's not my fault.
Fail. Yeah, that's a fail. That's definitely
There's no warranty here and the risks are all yours. And oh yeah, also if this happens, the 7 years of bad luck are on you, not me. So here's my solution. It's a piece of wood, this is pine. It's got a mirror on a gooseneck with a suction cup on the base, but we actually screw it in. We don't rely on the suction cup. There's a place right here to attach it to your tripod or whatever mount you're using. And here's where you attach your camera. We've got a thumb screw here, and I've actually got a couple of magnets here that hold the thumb screw in so you don't lose it. We have the thumb screw sticking up just far enough to hold the camera on. You don't want it sticking up too far or you'll run out of room in the camera, and if you try to screw it in too far, you could break it. You can put your camera on pretty easily, and it's usually easier to turn the camera at an angle like that. So you can see the camera's display in the mirror without the camera actually getting in the way. So the more of an angle you put it at, the easier it is to see the display without the camera getting in the way. The wood, mirror, and screws weigh about 1.5 pounds, give or take. Let me go ahead and mount this on a tripod so you can see what that looks like. Got a quick release here on the tripod. As you can see, the quick release goes on just fine. Okay, I've got my tripod here, my crappy tripod that I don't use very much. And there you go. It mounts just fine. Even this cheap tripod has no problem with the weight. If you wonder what I actually use, I'll show you. Here's my camera setup right here using the same kind of mount we're going to make. This one's made out of baltic birch plywood instead of pine, but it's basically the same thing. I also have an overhead mount and an articulating arm that runs from the ceiling running on a track so I can move it back and forth to all the places I need to shoot from. I also have another mount here hanging from this PVC from my overhead shots. I don't have a camera on it right now because that's the camera I'm using to shoot this. But for the overhead shots, the camera hangs on this, and you can see the mount comes off easily. That's why I have the shape the way I do at the top. And it fits in just like that. We're actually going to make this version first. Nothing fancy, and I'll try to make it as simple as I can so almost anyone can make it. So when we're done making this, you can stop watching the video if you want, or you can stick around and see how we turn it into this. We're about to build stage 1 of this mount. Almost anyone can make this, regardless of whether you've done woodworking or not. I go into extreme detail in this part of the video. It might even be overkill, but I wanted to make sure that virtually anyone would feel relatively confident that they could make this mount. So for those of you who find this part of the video too detailed, feel free to skim it. For the rest, I hope this helps. So here's what we need to make these mounts. There's links for these items in the description. We'll obviously need the mirror, which I got on Amazon. You can probably find something similar at Walmart. It magnifies 7 times, which may not strictly be necessary, but I think it helps. Next up is wood. I'm using pine because you'll have no problems finding it. It looks decent and it's pretty lightweight. The board needs to be long enough to be able to position the mirror with room to move it around if needed, and it seems like 13 or 14 inches is about the right length. This board is 14 inches long. Since the suction cup base measures about 2 3/4 inches, our wood needs to be at least that wide. Wider is fine, it doesn't add much to the weight, and if you build stage 2 of the mount, we'll cut off the excess anyway. This board is 3.5 inches wide and about 3/4 of an inch thick. The reason I'm using a board that's 3/4 of an inch thick is because it's easy to find. Any thicker is unnecessary, and perhaps most importantly, it's way easier to find insert nuts that work with this thickness than any other thickness. I originally built my mounts using a 1/2 inch Baltic birch plywood, and I wasn't able to find insert nuts for that thickness, so I had to tap it by hand. So let's go shopping for some wood. I went to my local Home Depot and bought some wood that was labeled like this. It's white wood/white pine. It's number 2, which means it's decent quality. Select or number 1 would be better. It's S4S, which means sanded on 4 sides. And now we get to the fun stuff. This says 1 by 4 by 4, which means that the wood is nominally 1 inch thick, 4 inches wide, and 4 feet long. But the word nominally means in name only. In other words, it's BS. As you can see, this wood is actually 3/4 of an inch thick, which happens to be what we want. Instead of 4 inches, it measures 3.5 inches wide, which is wide enough for our suction cup base, which is 2 3/4 inches. Oddly enough, the wood is actually 4 feet long. We only need 14 inches, but the rest won't hurt in case we mess something up. If you're buying this at your local big box store, they can probably cut it for you for free. Unless, of course, their cutting station is out of order. If it is, you can always get a cheap handsaw and cut it yourself. If you need help, ask someone at the store. Next up are insert nuts. They usually come in a package like this. We only need one, but extras never hurt. It should be 1/4 inch with 20 threads per inch and 20 millimeters long. These insert nuts have a flange on the top, which is nice but not strictly necessary. Notice the insert nuts have threads on the outside. You can tell they're threads because they're angled. If they look like this, they're not threads and you don't want them. Next are thumb screws. Again, we only need one. It should be 1/4 inch with 20 threads per inch and 1 inch long. We need 2 or 3 washers 1/4 inch. They usually come in a package like this. We need 2 wood screws, but get at least 4 because they're easy to damage. They usually come in a package like this. Get number 8 by 1 inch. Grab some neodymium magnets like these, also known as rare earth magnets. We need 2 of them. They should be 0.315 inches in diameter. They'll fit nice and snug in a 5/16 inch hole. Next up is a drill and 3 bits. They should be 3/16 inch, 1/4 inch, and 5/16 inch. If you don't have a drill or the bits, try finding someone you can borrow them from. Good luck with that, by the way. Or you can get them at Harbor Freight, either at a store close to you or online. I know I'll catch some flack for recommending Harbor Freight, but if you don't already have a drill, you probably won't need anything more than this. You can get the drill bits at Harbor Freight also in a set like this. Harbor Freight is always having sales like this one. Notice there's a coupon for 20% off one item, and the drill I suggested has a discount coupon also. So always check for coupons. You're also going to need a tape measure, a pencil of your choice, a Phillips head screwdriver, and a 6mm hex key, also known as an Allen wrench. You can get the 6mm hex key in a cheap set like this. Just make sure the set is metric and contains a 6mm key. So let's get to work. I've got my board, which is 14 inches long. The first thing I'm going to do is drill the hole for the thumb screw. I'll be using a 1/4 inch drill bit, which is the same diameter as the thumb screw. I make a mark from one end about 1 inch down. I want the hole to be centered in the board, so I measure the width of the board, which is 3.5 inches, divide by 2 giving me 1 3/4 inches, and make a mark showing me where to drill. When I drill the hole, I don't want to drill into my work surface, so it's always a good idea to use a backing board, which is just a piece of scrap wood. Even with a backing board, I don't want to drill too deep, so I'm going to use some painter's tape to show me when to stop drilling. I put the drill bit next to the side of the board with the tip sticking out a little past the edge of the board. Then I wrap some painter's tape around the bit to show me where to stop drilling. You could also use masking tape, it's pretty much the same thing. You don't need to do this, of course, just make sure you don't drill through something important. I put the drill bit in and tighten it. I make sure my drill is set to the right settings, then I line up the bit with my mark on the board and start to drill. Make sure you keep the drill straight up and down. Normally I'd use a drill press for this, but I'm trying to keep this simple. Drill slowly because this is soft wood and the drill will plow through it like butter. Now we're going to add the magnets to keep the thumb screw from falling out. It should end up looking something like this when we're done. And when we pull the thumb screw out, the magnet should stay in the board. The trick with getting these magnets apart is to slide them instead of trying to pull them apart, like this. Just don't let go of them after you get them apart. I don't really have a good reason why I'm using 2 magnets instead of 1. You can try 1 and see if it works. These 0.315-inch diameter magnets fit nice and snug in a 5/16 inch hole. So assuming I do everything correctly, we won't even need glue to hold them in. Ideally, I want to drill just deep enough for the magnets to fit in and maybe stick up a little rather than make the hole too deep. If you make it too deep and stick the magnets down in the hole, you'll have a really hard time getting them out. Trust me on this. So I'm attempting to put the magnets next to the tip of the drill bit, then attach some tape so I know how deep to drill. In order to figure out where to drill the hole for the magnets, I put the thumb screw and washer into the hole and make a mark next to the end of the washer. The idea is to make sure that at least some of the magnet touches the washer while keeping the 2 holes separate. That's the idea anyway. Now that I know where I want to drill the 5/16 inch hole, I drill it nice and slow so I don't drill it too deep. Now it's time to put the magnets in the hole if I can get them to cooperate, and see how I did. Putting the thumb screw into the hole next to the magnet takes a couple of tries because the magnets keep grabbing the thumb screw. I try shaking the screw out and it doesn't fall out, so it looks good. So I go ahead and pull the screw out. That's when I discover a problem. The magnets stay stuck to the thumb screw and washer and come right out of the board. That shouldn't happen, right? I already said the magnets fit nice and snugly into the 5/16 inch hole. What's the deal?
You said the thing was supposed to work!
Technically, it did work.
No, it didn't!
Okay. And I always do that. I always mess up some mundane detail.
Turns out I drilled the magnet hole too close to the screw, and the thin wall between the 2 holes broke. So now I'll need to re-drill the hole a little further from its current location. Later on I'll show you how to fix this problem, but right now let's get on to finishing stage 1. The next thing we need to do is set up the tripod mounting hole. Set the mirror base about where we're going to attach it, measure 2 inches from there, and make a mark centered in the board. 2 inches is sort of arbitrary. You're welcome to try other distances. I probably should have measured across the board also, just to make sure the mark was centered, but for some reason I didn't. Fortunately, it didn't matter. I'm going to drill a 5/16 inch hole for the insert nut. Rather than use tape on the bit this time, I'm just going to wing it. As long as I don't drill all the way through my backing board, I'll be fine. I just noticed that sometimes I use my brad point drill bits. Those are the ones with a sharp point on the end, and sometimes I use the other drill bits. I have no idea why I did that. You can use either type of bit in this project and be just fine. Now we're ready to install the insert nut. Remember the flange on the insert nut? We want this flange to be on the top of the board, which is the opposite side from the magnets. So we stick the insert nut in the board and use the 6mm hex key to screw the insert nut into the board. Try to keep it nice and vertical while screwing it in. Make sure the insert nut doesn't come out the other side, or else when we attach the tripod, it'll be too loose. If you screw it too far in, just back it out a little. The final step in completing stage 1 of our mount is to attach the suction cup base of the mirror to the mount. Remove the mirror carefully so you don't break it. I speak from experience. We need to drill 2 holes in the suction cup base for the screws to go through. I've already drilled 2 holes in this one before, so I'll drill 2 new ones to show you how. Put the suction cup base on a scrap piece of wood. Using a 3/16 inch drill bit, drill a hole at an angle like this. As soon as the drill breaks through, stop drilling. Then start drilling vertically until you break through the suction cup. Bending the arm out of the way helps. Then do the same for the other side. Once the holes are drilled, place a suction cup on the end of the board. Try to get it relatively centered. Take one of the 1-inch wood screws and screw the suction cup into the wood. Press down while you're doing it and stop when it feels fairly tight. Then do the same for the other side. Carefully snap the mirror back on. Insert the magnets in their hole. Then add the thumb screw and washer and try to attach your camera. If the thumb screw sticks up too much, be careful not to try and over-tighten it. Instead, just add another washer between the thumb screw and board and then try it again. Repeat if needed. So let's put it on my tripod and see how it works. Looks good, so that's about it for stage 1. Except I need to repair the hole for the magnets. That's pretty easy. Let's do that now. It'll be easier to work on this if we remove the mirror, so that's the first thing I do. Now I remove the thumb screw and we see the magnet come out of the wood with it. This is what we're going to fix. You can see how the two holes are too close together and there's no wall between them, so the hole for the magnets isn't snug enough to keep them in. That means we need to drill a new hole, and before we can do that, we need to fill the existing hole. To do that, I'll be using JB Weld Quick Wood. I bought it at Home Depot. As you can see by how little I have left in the tube, I use this fairly often. Never mind why. You pinch off a small amount and rub it around in your fingers. It starts off with 2 colors, and the idea is to mix the colors thoroughly. Mixing the 2 colors is what activates the putty and causes it to start to harden. Push the putty into the magnet hole and try to keep it out of the hole for the screw if you can. It's not the end of the world if you can't get it out of the screw's hole. We can always drill out the hole again if we needed to. Try to remove the excess putty on the top of the board so it's flush. We'll set this aside and let it dry for a little while. Normally Quickwood only takes about 20 minutes to harden, but with a hole this big, I gave it a couple of hours. I sanded it a little so it's nice and flush. Now I mark the drill point again, making sure this time I give myself a little more room. I use tape again to make sure I don't drill too deep. I drill the hole and stick the magnets back in and try it out. Success this time! Woohoo! The magnets stay in when I remove the thumb screw. So I reattach the mirror and all's good. Well, we're done with stage 1 of the project. We have a perfectly usable mount. You can stop right here if you want. While the first stage of this project was something virtually anyone can do, the next stage is for people who have some woodworking experience. We're going to draw a pattern on the wood and cut it out using a bandsaw, or you could use a jigsaw, of course. We're going to sand it down to match the pattern, then sand the entire mount. It's not particularly difficult by any means, but it's probably not for anyone who just went out and bought their first drill from Harbor Freight. As you already know, we're going to take this and turn it into this. To do that, we need to draw the shape we want to create on the board. When I drew the shape on the board, I just used a pencil, but it turned out that didn't show up very well in the video, so I'm showing thick black lines in the video. In real life, simple pencil lines are fine. Start by drawing a circle around the suction cup base so you end up with something like this. Now use the thumb screw hole as the center and make a mark a 1/2 inch above the hole and a 1/2 inch below the hole. You can make it wider than 1 inch, but I wouldn't make it any narrower. Using the insert nuts hole as the center, repeat the process and make a mark a 1/2 inch above the hole and a 1/2 inch below the hole. Using the 2 top marks, draw a line from the end to the circle. Do the same for the bottom. We're going to round the end, something like this. But I'm just going to freehand the curve using a sander, so you don't really need to draw this unless you really want to. We could leave it like this, but there's 2 reasons I didn't. The first is the shape reminds me of something. Can't exactly say what, but it's slightly disturbing. The second reason is, since I use mine in an overhead mount, I need something that will hold it in the mount yet allow me to slip it out of the mount. So I made a mark about 2 inches from the circle on the top and bottom line. Then I drew a line from the mark to the edge of the circle and repeated the process on the bottom. Now we're ready to cut out the shape. I'm using my bandsaw to cut out the shape. I haven't had it for very long, so I'm not real sharp with it yet. You could also use a jigsaw. I make sure to always stay outside the lines because I'm going to sand away the final amount. Sanding it will be more accurate and it will look nicer. Speaking of sanding, probably the easiest way to sand this is to use a spindle sander, but I don't have one. I do have a drill press though, and I bought these sanding drums off of Amazon and they work pretty well once you get used to them. As with everything else, links are in the description. So I put one in my drill press and set the drill press to its maximum speed. Then I set up a couple of pieces of wood to act as supports for the board and clamp them down. I have a vacuum attachment I use and it works great to capture most of the dust. I've got the camera a long way away from the sanding and I'm using the telephoto because getting sanding particles in your camera sucks, let me tell you. Consider yourself lucky if you manage to get them out and still have a working camera. The trick to this kind of sanding is to be patient and don't press too hard. Just keep working at it until you sand just enough to remove the pencil line. If you make a mistake and sand too deeply, just try and even it out the best you can. I have a sandpaper cleaning stick that I use to help keep the sanding drum from caking up. Here's where I round over the end by sanding freehand. I just keep working at it till it looks right. Also, try to keep the board flat on the support pieces or you'll end up with slanting edges. All that's left to do is some finish sanding. So I pull out my sanding station, which is basically a big box with pegboard on top and a place to attach a dust collection hose. It does a decent job of helping keep the sanding dust to a minimum. I'm using 120 grit sandpaper in my random orbital sander. I lightly sand all the sides and edges and pay a little more attention to the places that didn't come out as uniform as I would have liked from the drum sanding. I also round over the edges with the sander. I could have used a round over bit on my router table, but since I'm already sanding, this is pretty easy. And the last thing to do is put it all back together. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, go ahead and like it. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. I think you've heard all of these things before. I guess that's it. Thanks for watching.